What is trauma and what steps can you take to start resolving it? Let's listen to what Dr. Jordan Peterson has to say and what you can learn from it. In general, everything can be traumatic that is too much for you to handle at that specific moment. That means that most traumas actually arise from childhood, because as a small child, you don't have the capacity to handle many things. So things often can become traumatic. Let's listen to what Dr. Jordan Peterson has to say.
A trauma is a problem you encounter in your life that's quite deep, so that it unsettles you, that you do not resolve. So it's like, imagine that in your bedroom, there were holes that you could fall through into trouble. And so you want to make a map of where all the holes are so that you can walk through the landscape without falling into the pit. Now, it'd be better if you just fixed the holes, but at least you have the landscape mapped out. Well, a trauma is a hole that hasn't been filled in. And so maybe if you had a trauma when you were 4, you hit a wall and you couldn't resolve the trauma, that's no different than not maturing in relationship to that problem. So what you have at hand there are only the tools that you developed by the time you were 4.
And the last things he said are crucially important. A trigger is always connected to a past trauma. And when you encounter a trigger in your everyday life, you only have the tools to deal with it that you had back then. For example, when you were 4. And of course, back then these tools weren't enough, and they aren't now either. What happens is that you go through your life and stack up trauma after trauma after trauma on top of your base trauma or the root cause. I also see that with my clients all the time. So let's say the original trauma is that your mother made you feel like you're not good enough, and that was too overwhelming for you to handle in that moment. So we have the base trauma here. I call it the ISE. This is the initial sensitizing event, the functional term for it. And then you go through your life and you encounter similar situations. So for example, other family members make you feel like you are not good enough. You are now here sensitized for that. So when other family members do something that just remotely resembles something that could make you feel not good enough, it builds on top of each other because you're very sensitized for this. And this just goes stronger. So for example, friends make you feel like you're not good enough, and then eventually your partner makes you feel like you're not good enough. And it keeps building on top of each other. What can you do now to finally resolve this so you no longer struggle with these issues? We'll get to that in just a moment, but for now it's also important to understand all the implications of that. Let's listen to this next clip of Jordan Peterson, where he describes how adults have built up trauma through their entire lives and what that leads to.
They couldn't go home and clean up their room. They hadn't cleaned up their room for like 20 years for all sorts of reasons. Maybe because every time they did try to do anything positive in their family, no matter what it was, they were immediately punished and undermined. And so if they even went home and dared to start cleaning up the room, they'd face resistance within the family that was just a manifestation of the 50,000 times they'd been discouraged in the past.
So as you can see, trauma doesn't just translate one-to-one, like in the example with not feeling good enough. It generalizes, and your subconscious puts everything together according to how similar it feels. You maybe always have been punished when you try to do something positive. So what that leads to is that you cannot bring yourself to do something positive anymore, because subconsciously, positivity is now connected with punishment. At the very core, our subconscious makes these connections to keep us safe. So if positivity is connected to punishment, our subconscious wants to keep us safe from the punishment it expects. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a good mechanism to let go of these connections once they don't serve us anymore. In the next clip, Jordan talks briefly about one of the worst forms of trauma. Now, of course, you cannot really compare that objectively, and whatever happened to you is the worst for you. But here he talks about childhood sexual abuse, and it's important to understand how to heal that, so we understand how to heal basically all traumas that are within us.
And the reason betrayal is the worst problem is, like, if you and I want to have a relationship, we have to trust each other. And betrayal is the violation of the trust upon which relationships are predicated. So it blows apart everything. So the lowest level of hell for Dante, the bottom of hell, was filled with betrayers. And that's right. That's childhood sexual abuse. Like, it's the ultimate betrayal, right? A child sexual predator is someone who takes the role of guardian to be the wolf, right? It's the worst form of betrayal. And so it just devastates children, and because they're actually faced with the problem of malevolence at a very early age. And what the hell? It's like, you're 4 and now you see the bottom of hell. Well, that's trauma. And the way you treat that, by the way, is you walk people through a topography of hell. That's what you do. And you can do that.
You have to walk them through hell. And here we are very close on how to resolve trauma, move forward and grow. Let's listen to this next clip where he talks about and makes very clear that you have to face your demons.
Much of what you've talked about stems back to childhood trauma and things that happen in our formative years. I often wonder, those holes in the bedroom floor you describe, the early traumas,
They're often in the bedroom floor, by the way.
Yeah.
You bet.
Can we ever fill those, or can we just put planks of wood over them?
Oh, no. You can't put planks of wood over them. You have to fill them.
You have to fill the holes. Everything else is just a band-aid on top of your deep inner wounds. You have to face your traumas in order to start resolving them. And I do that with my clients as well. Regressing back to the original trauma when it first came up, and like this, for the first time, often in 30 or 40 years, their subconscious has a chance to process what happened and finally deal with it. And by processing the emotions, you can finally start to let it go. You free up capacity and space for new tools and answers and solutions when similar situations arise in your life. If we go back to the beginning of this video, you could say you're finally maturing in relation to your trauma. You're now not 4 anymore, but finally an adult with new and different tools to face these issues, just as Jordan describes here.
That's how you fix a trauma. You replace the road you did take with the road you should have taken. And now you have a road forward. And once you have a road forward, the trauma is no longer traumatic because you have a road. Your brain brings up the past because you have not specified the proper road forward.
You have a new and better way forward. And one amazing thing that can happen is that when you go back and resolve the root cause, many other things often naturally just take care of themselves, just as Jordan describes here.
And sometimes, if you go all the way to the bottom and you solve that bottom problem, you solve a whole bunch of peripheral problems.
As some of you may know, I use hypnosis to help my clients. And I really love hypnosis because often you don't consciously know where trauma started. Right? Most traumas, as we established, start in earliest childhood, so when you were 1 year old or 2 years old, and often you don't have a conscious memory or recollection of that. But hypnosis allows us to go into your subconscious all the way back where the trauma started. Because even if you consciously don't know anymore, your subconscious always knows where the issue is. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an issue. And I have regressed clients back to when they were 2 years old, 1 year old. At a certain stage of the brain development, the main purpose of your brain is to keep you safe. So everything that is considered or perceived as unsafe can be very traumatic for you. And like I said before, when you go all the way back to the root cause and resolve it, what often happens is that all the built-up traumas resolve themselves automatically. Now, that does not have to happen. It doesn't happen always, but often it happens. And this obviously can lead to hypnosis being very powerful and helping you relatively fast with resolving traumas. Now, even if these traumas are resolved, you still need to choose different actions in your life, right? This is not a fix it all. You still have to choose different actions and get used to the lack of trauma inside of you, which is also something new that you need to decide to grow into. But what if you're struggling so much that you can barely start anywhere? What can you do if these issues are affecting your life so much that you cannot seem to move forward or do anything at all? Let's listen to what Jordan has to say here.
One of the things you do with people who are struggling is you make the simple even simpler, because then they can get a toehold.
And this is exactly what you need. A step so small that you can take it. And this can feel very humiliating if you're used to doing a lot. But the good thing is that you don't progress linear, as Jordan says here.
Now, the upside is that once you take that first step, you've looked the beast in the face, and you'll start progressing, not linearly, but exponentially in speed. So what's cool is that it doesn't really matter how small that first step is, because it'll start doubling. And anything that doubles grows unbelievably quickly.
It does not matter how small the step is, as long as you can take it. I have broken down a conversation between Jordan Peterson and Andrew Huberman in the video right over here. One of my mentors calls this concept "reduce it to the ridiculous", and it's insanely powerful, so be sure to check it out. And if you watched up until here, don't forget to like.